Talkline Network Radio, America's longest-running Jewish broadcast network, the voice of the Jewish community.
Here is your host.
Welcome back, and you're listening to Chaim the Radio, 620 on your AM dial. You're listening to Talkline Communications Network, and I'm here live on the air with my co-host, Dr. Faisal Chaim. We are now pleased to welcome my colleague, New York City Councilman Robert Cornegy, a good friend, and Councilman Cornegy represents the 36th Council District, which includes the neighborhoods of Bed-Stuy, parts of Crown Heights. He's also chairman of the Housing and Buildings Committee, and he has led the charge on many successful initiatives in the City Council to support small businesses, seniors, and tenants. He is also the leading candidate running for Brooklyn Borough President right now. Councilmember Cornegy, welcome, and thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Councilmember Deutsch. It's so great to be able to be a part of your show. I do have to beg your indulgence. I'm moving around the borough and actually jumping out of a vehicle with my driver, but I didn't want to miss an opportunity to address your very vast audience on a couple of issues that I think are incredibly important as we talk about recovery and resiliency, which seems to be the buzzwords for turning the city around after this pandemic or during the pandemic. And there's just a lot of discussions that I'd certainly like to have that are germane to both your community and mine. In addition to being the chair of Housing and Buildings, I'm the former chair in the last legislative session of Small Business and currently on Finance, Economic Development, and like you said, Housing and Buildings Committee. And I think those are incredibly important positions to be able to have a robust conversation about recovery and resiliency and what it means for the borough of Brooklyn and your community and my community.
Definitely. And firstly, I want to tell our listeners that you are 6'5", correct?
No, you're 6'5".
So how tall are you?
Yeah. So I'm actually 7 feet tall.
You're 7.
I held the Guinness Book of World Records for some time as the tallest politician in the world. I mean, your work, it pales in comparison to the work that you do, belies the fact that you're a little bit shorter than me. But
I want to tell you I want to tell you something that in the chamber, and I want to tell our listeners, in the chamber, Councilmember Robert Cornegy sits right next to me. So when we assemble in the chamber, he's right next to me. I always try to get to my seat before Robert gets to his seat, because if I get there after him, his legs are literally under my desk, right?
Absolutely. And, one of the things that I think is important to mention, though, Chaim, before we get into the meat of this conversation is a lot of who I am today is informed by my experiences playing sports abroad. And one of the greatest places I had an opportunity to play was actually in Israel, in Petah Tikva. And I really enjoyed my stay there, but it gave me a world view and understanding of some of the issues that are germane to folks here from Israel, but also what Israel is really, truly like. So I've really enjoyed sharing that experience, and sometimes we have conversations about what it was like to be there in Israel during a very volatile time. I was there in the 90s as an athlete, and this cosmopolitan way of how Israel looks is quite different from what I remember. But I do remember the religious consequences and the viability of religion in Israel. So that kind of shapes the way that I do business here at the council. So I'm grateful for that experience because it's given me a worldview and an understanding of what's necessary at the New York City Council to serve all constituencies. And
that's an extremely important issue for the Jewish community here in New York City. So thank you for sharing that with our listeners. Let's talk about homelessness. My district is currently facing a battle over a proposed homeless shelter in Brighton Beach. And residents are extremely opposed to the congregate shelter model, including myself, which allows 10 or 15 people at a time to share a room, dorm style. What is your perspective on this? Is very important for Southern Brooklyn, in particular in my district, and also we all know the mayor is planning on opening up 90 of these congregate shelters throughout the city. So what's your perspective on this, on the congregate shelters?
So it's funny, Chaim, because you and I, who bill ourselves as good fiscal stewards of the city's dollar, understand that it costs 4 times as much to temporarily house individuals and families in these shelters than it does to put them on a pathway to long-term sustainable housing. So I'm against it totally. I think it sometimes disrupts communities, and it also is not a good fiscal way of dealing with the homelessness problem that we have. The best way to do that is to take those dollars and invest it in long-term sustainable housing with support services. So every time one of these temporary shelters there's a conversation about it, it actually turns my stomach, because that's not in the best interest of long-term sustainable housing. It disrupts communities, and we can do better. We're smarter as a city. You and I have committed ourselves to being good fiscal stewards, and I just think that that's a horrible model to continue to perpetuate on the city.
And this is something the mayor is doing only 10 months before he's leaving office, and actually they're signing leases, which is going to go well into the next administration, where it's going to take away the power and the own, the next mayor whoever's going to be the next mayor is going to take away the way they want to operate and deal with the homelessness, because obviously this administration failed the homeless population. And it's so important that we stand up against these congregate shelters before the mayor leaves office. And this is extremely near and dear to my constituents. And they formed a coalition for safe housing for the homeless. And they've been extremely vocal, and they're in the planning stages right now. And hopefully we'll be able to stop it. And it's going to be an uphill battle, but with your help and help of others, I'm sure we'll be able to send a strong message to City Hall that housing the homeless in a congregate style, in a dorm style, doesn't give them independence. Another issue that my constituents care deeply about is law enforcement, and many New Yorkers, and with all the anti-cop rhetoric that has seeped into our culture, where do you land on the defund the police movement? Because we all know that a lot of pressure has been put on members of the city council. I know last year before the budget, I received literally thousands of emails from people asking me to defund the NYPD by $1.5 billion. And when I looked at who those people are, most of them don't even live in New York, and they just send emails. They just want to destroy our city. And it's going to happen again. We have another budget coming up. And they're starting to be vocal again, saying to defund the NYPD. What is your opinion on the defund the police movement?
So I think it's important to note that I am an African-American male in the city of New York. And I want to just give context to that, because my response is my community, the African-American community, Bedford-Stuyvesant and Northern Crown Heights, has never asked for defund or abolish. What we've asked for is policing in our communities that doesn't violate our civil and human rights. So I'm opposed to any argument around defund. I don't get that luxury, council member, when I've had a 1-year-old baby killed in their stroller in my district over the last 6 months, and a senior, a beautiful senior, 70-year-old senior, shot in the face on public transportation on Black Lives Matter mural. So I don't get that luxury of this general argument around defund and abolish when we have so much heinous crimes perpetrated against general citizens in our community. So I'm vehemently opposed to any argument that's around defund and or abolish. And I've spent a lot of political capital in that argument. So people, advocates have come out against me. They protested at my house. But I still believe that the best way to get long-term sustainable partnership is the opposite of that. Getting to a better place with the police department is not no policing. That is a ridiculous narrative, and we need to move away from that. We need to have a relationship to the police in our communities, and we need to have a relationship to the brass in our communities, and I have that. My 3 commands within my community, the 7-9, the 8-1, and the 7-7, in addition to Brooklyn North, you know as well as I do that I covet the relationships between our law enforcement officials and our on-the-ground workers because they deliver for our communities. It is not mutually exclusive to demand criminal justice reform while still supporting the men and women who have 2 mandates every single day, which one is to leave their homes and to serve in communities that they're assigned and to return home safely to their families. You got to stop this ridiculous argument over the 2. There's no defund and abolish argument that I'm a part of or will ever be a part of.
Right. As a borough president, you're running for borough president, for Brooklyn borough president, and there's a lot of issues, land use issues that a borough president is involved with and gives approval on, and as well as being, a cheerleader for Brooklyn. Let's talk about the cheerleading of property taxes, helping homeowners, because we're seeing our property taxes consistently going up. And many of my constituents are homeowners contending with the ever-increasing cost of owning a home here in New York City. So what do you think needs to be done to improve the situation?
First of all, we have to prioritize our homeowners in this borough. I think that they're a solid contributor to our tax base, and the fact that we are continually trying to generate revenue on the backs of our homeowners is a failed policy. We need to be supporting our homeowners, especially during the pandemic, where we're seeing this cancel rent argument, and we're seeing the moratoriums around eviction disproportionately negatively impacting small homeowners who are actually the lion's share of affordable housing folks. So me as your borough president is going to really, really, really drill down on supporting our home ownership. The idea of, in America, but certainly in Brooklyn, pathways to home ownership and supporting home ownership is a priority for me. The way that we've leveraged home ownership versus tenancy is really ridiculous, and we've left our homeowners incredibly vulnerable in this climate, in this tough economic climate with increasing energy costs and this a narrative around cancel rent and eviction moratoriums. You and I both have fought for moratoriums around foreclosures, and not just in a forbearance way, but actually absolving homeowners in this tough economic climate of responsibility as it relates to mortgage payments in this tough economic climate are a priority for me. So I think that we've got to shift the narrative a little bit. So while we want to have affordable housing and we think that tenants should have rights, I don't know how you get rights while you leave our homeowners vulnerable. And this disproportionate inequity in how taxes are levied in particular portions of Brooklyn in particular, where some of the most expensive homes are paying equal to or less than homes in your community and my community, is an assessment issue that we have to deal with, and we have to deal with it right.
Correct. I want to speak about a bill that I introduced in the City Council, and we spoke about homelessness before, and we have approximately 60,000 people who are homeless here in New York City, who are in homeless shelters, and then we have street homelessness. Now, right now the governor has a moratorium that people don't need to pay rent, and that moratorium, I believe, ends in May. Now, if we don't do something as a city, and once the moratorium ends, because many people have lost their jobs and can't pay the rent, and we're going to see a lot more homeless. We're going to see another wave of people being evicted, people being homeless, and which is going to lead to another wave of homelessness in the city of New York. So, and it could be in the tens of thousands. So I have a bill, I introduced the bill in the City Council several months ago, proposing that the HRA one-shot deal program which offers grants to tenants in need of emergency cash flow to pay rent, should be extended to include all tenants impacted by COVID unemployment. The idea of this bill is to ensure that tenants are able to make their rent and landlords are still able to pay the bills and keep the lights on. And this is legislation that I believe can make a huge impact in the lives of small property owners. And I'm going to bring one or two landlords, small property owners, onto the show momentarily to hear what they're going through. And it's unfair when, people that can make the rent, right? If they end up homeless, and you mentioned, council member, that if they end up homeless, we spend billions of dollars on homeless shelters, on making sure that people have a roof over their head. Now, if we don't do this, extend the one-shot deal by paying people who cannot afford the rents now, who are behind 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 months, it's going to cost us, in the long run, it's going to cost us a lot more money if we don't help them out now by paying their rent. Because if we don't do it now and we wait for them to get evicted, it's going to cost us it's going to cost New York City billions of dollars. So that's why this is important. And it's twofold. Not only does it help the tenant, but it helps that property owner. They have to pay the real estate taxes. They have to pay the water bill. They have to pay, in many cases, electricity. There's so many bills that they have to pay for the maintenance and everything. So it's a win-win for everyone. So I want to bring one of the small property owners onto the show, and we're gonna welcome him in a few seconds. And I'm going to keep his name anonymous to protect his privacy. So this way, you know how the city works. We've been hearing about the governor, how he takes revenge, how he's vindictive. Yep. So we don't want people to know who this person is, because we don't want the city or anyone to take revenge and go back after him because he's calling out. He'll probably call out the governor. So let's welcome our first guest. And again, I just want to say, small property owners across the city are caught between a rock and a hard place. And on one hand, they have tenants who are unable to pay rent, likely due to COVID unemployment. And on the other hand, they're also still culpable for their standard bills, like taxes, utilities, and the other costs that come with owning a property. And they're stuck between feeling empathy for the unfortunate situation the tenants are facing, but also struggling to ensure that they can still pay their bills. And everyone wants to pay their bills. And it's very embarrassing when someone can't. And these aren't people who own massive amounts of real estate and can afford that loss. They own a typical home with a basement apartment or an investment property. And it's so important to make sure that we take care of both. We take care of the tenants, and at the same time we take care of those small property owners. So let's get the first guest. I just want to add as well that even when there's a moratorium on mortgage payments, there's still no moratorium on the escalating energy costs that go up every single year, whether it's Cornegy, whether it's whatever, and those small homeowners have to bear that brunt, and there's no relief there. So we have to provide relief there as well. Definitely, I fully agree with you. Yeah, definitely, that's a very good point. All right, let's get all right. Our first guest, you're on the air.
Yes, hi, Chaim. Happy to be in your show.
Thank you. It's great having you, Mr. No Name. So tell us, as a small property owner, tell us what you have been going through and how have you been paying your bills or haven't been paying your bills. Tell us what has been happening since the beginning of the pandemic.
Hi, let me tell you, it starts a year before the pandemic started, a year before the COVID. On June or July 2019, the new law came to force that we can't raise the rent anymore after you have a vacancy. We used to have authority to do 20% more, and then we used to fix the property, fix the apartment, and get another 2.25%. on each dollar that we used to spend. They cut those off, and from that day, the apartment building died. From that day, we know that we lost our money that we invest. And then the epidemic came, and it made it much worse. So we really already with over 2 years in the crisis, and and what happened now with the COVID, it just made it just a killing bullet. People are taking advantage. Yes, there is a lot of people that really cannot pay, but most of them, they're getting help from somewhere, and they're taking advantage on us. Why are they taking advantage? Because our leaders, they're giving them a they're giving them a debt. They're supporting them. They're telling them, you don't have to pay. Use the security deposit. The court system is closed. The landlord cannot do anything to you. Nobody can evict you. The landlord cannot demand the money.
So in other words, like there is a moratorium. So Robert, I just want to ask you. I'm just curious. So if there's a moratorium till May, now what happens if a person still has the same job, still has the same income, and nothing has changed? So what the small property owner is saying is that even when the person still has the job and still has an income, because of the moratorium, they're making an excuse. Oh, we don't have to pay rent.
Right. So the reality is, it's going to be hard for small landlords, even after the moratorium is lifted in May, to evict. You have to be, this is, first of all, in the city of New York as it stands now, somebody could live in your property for an entire year without paying rent. It's a system towards tenants, landlords. It's going to be, quite conceivably, even worse. I don't know what kind of case you have to bring to be able to evict somebody after this. So from March to March is an entire year that some people have not paid rent, and understandably so, right? So we're thinking that part of the federal stimulus package has to be to supplement what people weren't able to pay for small homeowners. Small homeowners are going to lose their properties quite considerably, quite conceivably, without a bail, not without the support from the federal government. So we are lobbying to make sure that while eviction moratorium, that there is certain a foreclosure moratorium, which is not the forbearance, because that's what they're offering. The banks are offering people a forbearance, which allows you to pay at the end of your mortgage. We're saying, no, that's not what you're offering to tenants. Why would you offer that? Why would you think that that's a good deal for homeowners who have been bearing the brunt of this? So there is a fight that's about to start in May in support of homeowners, unfortunately.
So, that's why I think, having the one-shot program extended, and we could use stimulus money. We could definitely use it for the one-shot to make sure that those rents are paid, because when it comes May, when this moratorium ends, you're going to have craziness in the city between property owners and tenants. They're going to be fighting, do you owe me rent? Can I evict you? Can I not evict you? And then we're just dividing the community, we're dividing people, we're dividing property owners to tenants opposed to tenants. And people who are property owners, they put their whole life in buying that property, and then it gets destroyed. So we definitely need government's help. I want to bring in another property owner who's on the air right now. Hi, you're on the air.
Good evening, Chaim.
Good evening.
Nice to be on your show. What I wanted to say regarding all this matter, that I don't see, it's hypocrisy over here, the way that the government in the city behave and treat the landlords versus the tenants. They're giving all the leeway all the benefits and everything for the tenants, for individuals. And I can understand it in some extent that if an individual lost his job and he doesn't have income, obviously because of the pandemic and all the other causes, is having hard time paying the rent. But somebody has to step in, because it cannot be in one hand. You tell him don't pay rent, and you keep on extending that. But on the other token, we have to pay the real estate tax 100%. We have to pay our mortgage with no break. In the beginning, the bank say, okay, you can go ahead and extend it for 3 months. But after the 3 months, me as individual, my mortgage expired exactly 6 months ago. And for me to go ahead and get another mortgage, it's impossible, because now the value of the property decreased, because obviously the tenants don't pay rent, because the governor, Como, they ordered them, don't pay rent. You have time, don't worry about it. They cannot evict you, they cannot do anything. And even if you be able to evict somebody, obviously did not pay you for the last 9 months, so you lost that money, and then you have to pay all those expenses. Me personally, I have to borrow money every month just to go ahead and pay my expenses on the building. Half of the people doesn't pay rent, and the commercial tenants, they didn't pay rent for 3 months, and now they're willing to pay 25%. They do us a favor like that. So I'm thinking, if the government tries to bail out the individuals, we are also, as a landlord, also an individual, because we have, on top of everything, we have our own family to support, and obviously we cannot support him if that's the way, this is the outcome, that we're not getting our income that we used to get. So I don't know who's coming in to help, and who you want to help. You want to help the one on the tenant, and we are also tenants versus the bank. We have to pay the mortgages, we have to pay the real estate tax, all the other taxes, and all the summons that they come, and they're willing to give us no problem. And on top of everything, in front of my building, in the city, I have homeless shelters right next to it, and then I have all those homeless people hanging out by the front. They're selling drugs, they're doing prostitution, they're fighting all day with pedestrians, with innocent people. Whatever it is, we've been calling 311 on a daily basis, few times with no response. And when we call the police and we try to put a complaint for drugs, for all the things that they're doing, fighting or any other criminal act that I think that they're doing, they come and they say, listen, our hands are tied because the mayor give them orders not to bother those people. You cannot do anything to them. And even if they arrest somebody, they have the revolving doors that you get somebody that is commit a crime, like somebody was breaking into the building, he broke the front glass. They came, they took him, and 1 hour later he was out with no bail, with nothing.
So not only do you have a small building that people are not paying rent, but you also have like a block in front of your house, in front of the building, that are full with people who are homeless, people that are vendors, and you also there's prostitution, and I could say that I could vouch for that because I'm a little familiar, because you approached me and I went down to Manhattan one night to see for myself, and the place was a mess. That block was a mess, and I blame this on the mayor. The people that are out there, the illegal vendors that are out there on that block, we can't touch now. There's no agency that actually enforces illegal vendors. And secondly, if you have a homeless person, you cannot force a homeless person to go into shelter. And it's very unfortunate that a homeless individual who is street homeless does not want to go into one of these shelters because it's unsafe. And I don't blame them. That's why what Councilmember Cornegy mentioned, supportive housing, permanent housing, that is the solution. So I don't see anything changing with this current mayor. We need a change in government. and we need people that are common sense, like my colleague, Councilmember Robert Cornegy, who are common sense, and small building owners, small property owners, such as the two we have today on the air. No one wants to evict anyone, and they have feelings. And even when someone doesn't pay rent, they keep them because they understand how it is when people are losing their jobs. But they also, on the other hand, need to support their family. That's why government needs to step in and bail everyone out, bail the tenants out, bail out the property owners.
That's exactly what I wanted to add, that we're not looking to evict anybody. It's not in our menu to do that. We just want to live, want to support our family, and we want to save our investment that we work very hard all our life to make it. That's the bottom line.
And it's extremely important. And Robert, as our next borough president, I have confidence in you as the next borough president. What are you looking to change in order to bring back the property owners, the tenants, and not to divide everyone, because things will be chaos. The next administration will have a much more difficult time because our mayor is killing the city and our city is regressing. And I know that one of the property owners is already considering moving out of New York City. He doesn't want to live in New York City. He wants to sell his buildings and just leave it. And this is a major problem.
So this is a major problem for me. The idea that we are going to have a mass exodus akin to 1980. So I've been around long enough to remember when there was such a disinvestment in property that it left us in a tremendous lurch that was almost impossible to fix. But while we find ourselves just getting out of that, we're hit with this again. So Chaim, I don't want to tell your age, but we're around the same age. We remember when there was a huge disinvestment in property, in Brooklyn in particular, and what the impact economically of that was. We have to support our homeowners, and we have to demand from our mayoral candidates that they have to answer to this. They got to answer about homelessness and how we're going to address that moving forward. And they have to answer how they're going to support our families who are small homeowners who really bear the burden of affordable housing. Like, it's not on these large buildings. They found a way, in some instances, to get away from affordable housing. Our smaller homeowners that are in your district and in my district bear the brunt of affordable housing. We should be supporting those families and those homeowners by doing the right thing. And the fact that we aren't able to do that, listen, I have 12 months left, no matter what happens in June, as the chair of Housing and Buildings, and intend to leave a solid legacy of support for our mom and pops and our small business owners who happen to be landlords and developers. They cannot be left out of the equation as we look to move the city forward. This idea about recovery and resiliency that doesn't include supporting our small property owners is a ridiculous proposition. So as we look to get these resources from the federal government, those resources have to be allocated to ensure that people can keep their properties in their families and support affordable housing. It's a very simple equation that I don't understand how the current administration is not getting it. And if they don't get it, fine. We have 12 months, actually 8 months left to make sure that the next administration is fully aware of what needs to be done around the homeless situation and not spending 4 times as much to temporarily house folks, but to put them on a pathway to sustainable long-term housing by supporting our small homeowners is what we have to do. And I intend to do that as the chair of Housing and Buildings in my last few months in the council.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Robert Cornegy. To all the listeners, you're listening to New York City Councilman Robert Cornegy, who's also running for Brooklyn Borough President. He currently represents the 36th Council District, including the neighborhoods of Bed-Stuy and Williamsburg. So I just want to, Bed-Stuy and parts of Crown Heights. I'm just testing you, Robert. You didn't correct me.
I'll let you finish before I
So thank you so much. And one of the common sense New York City Council members Councilmember Robert Cornegy. So thank you for joining us, and I'm looking forward to having you on